Hello and welcome to Enjoying Everyday Life. Could you use some help setting boundaries in your life? Well, we've got the doctor in the house today. Dr. Henry Cloud joins Joyce, Aaron Cluley, and me to discuss the importance of healthy boundaries and to offer practical help in making them work for you. So grab a notebook and a Bible and get ready for a great discussion.
So Dr. Cloud wrote the book Boundaries with Dr. John Townsend. He's a psychologist and author, a leadership consultant, written 45 books, 20 million books sold. You have a new book out called Why I Believe.
Yeah. Dr. Cloud is a psychologist, if you don't know him, so he's going to psychoanalyze me here on the show.
Yeah. So we're just very happy to have you, especially here talking to us about kind of your keystone thing, which is boundaries and how important they are in all of our lives. So can we set up the need for boundaries? I have so many things going through my head of the need for boundaries.
Yeah.
But what would you describe as the main reason that boundaries are so vital?
Oh, that's like saying you want water, air, or food. You know, you can't. It's hard to boil down to one. But basically, a boundary is a property line, and so it defines where you are and where you end and someone else begins. And the simplest illustration of a boundary is the first one we know in life, and that's your skin. So your skin boundary is kind of the fence, right? And what does it do? It keeps the bad stuff out. You know, if you pour infected something on you, it's going to bounce off unless you don't have a boundary there and you got to cut and then it gets in. And it keeps the good stuff in. You know, you don't want your liver falling out. But stuff
Nobody
like that.
wants that.
That's so embarrassing.
That's what a boundary is. It's you and your life. What are you going to allow into your life? I mean, we open our mouth to let good things in, sometimes too much, but we can close it, you know, to not let bad stuff in, and you can open it to let the bad stuff out. So the Bible and all of psychology tells us that it's very important to have clear boundaries so we know what we're letting into our life. There's bad stuff in us we got to get out through confession and grief and all that, but we need to be in control of that. And boundaries, you said the most important reason, one of them is, just like Galatians 5 says, it is for freedom that Christ has set you free. God wanted human freedom. So you should be free to say no to me if I want to do something that you don't want to do or is not good for you. And you should be free to say yes, but in human relationships, we start to control each other. And you know, step over the fence. What does the Bible call that? It's a trespass.
Yeah.
So
That's why we all
Before
need
I
so much
ever
help.
wrote the book Boundaries, I was in a situation where I was being controlled by the person that I worked for. And I didn't really realize that's what it was for about 4 years. And then when I realized it, I got really mad at that person. And God spoke to me and he said, don't be mad at him, you let him do it.
Yeah.
And so that was the first inclination I had about boundaries is, you know, people will take advantage of you if you don't have a boundary and let them know that they can't.
And you said something so important because boundaries are ultimately about self-control.
Right.
The fruit of the Spirit is self-control. And it's interesting because you started out, you know, you said that person was controlling me. Well, that was your experience until you realized, wait a minute, I'm in control. I could say no to this. I could walk. I could call the police. There's a lot of things I could do. Now, certainly a lot of people are so, you know, there's horrible situations where their freedom's been taken away and we need to get help. But most of the time, we are not executing the freedom that God has wired. And, you know, people feel guilty if they do it. There's a lot of fears and stuff we have to work through.
Well,
but
for a lot of people, I think
right.
it's very hard to say no.
It is hard to say.
I went through that for a period of time, even in ministry. It was like people would call and say, well, God really spoke to our heart that you're supposed to do our conference. Well, you start throwing the God word around.
Oh,
it's like,
gosh.
Well,
Yeah, that's
maybe,
just spiritual manipulation.
yeah, maybe I better do it. And then I thought, well, God may have told you, but he didn't told me. So until he does, I'm not coming.
Tell him to call me.
I found out that I had to say no or I was not going to survive.
Yeah.
That's right. You know, it's so interesting. I give you a great verse on this. In 2 Corinthians 9, 1 Corinthians 9, Paul is talking about giving. And certainly it's in the context of money, but it applies to all of giving. And it's so powerful. He says in that one little verse, give as you have purposed in your heart, as you've chosen to. And then he gives 2 warnings, not begrudgingly or under compulsion. For God loves a cheerful giver. So begrudgingly is when somebody pressures you from the outside and you give in. You're not giving, you give in, but then you are holding a grudge against it. That's the external pressure, which everybody gets. But there's internal pressure under compulsion. That's where, well, I should say yes because I'm not being a good Christian if I say no. Right. So we have internal restrictions on our freedom and we have external forces. And that's where self-control is needed to be developed.
And
That's
when
a
you
fruit
let
of the
people
Spirit.
do that to you, what my experience has been is then I start to resent them.
That's right. That's the begrudging. That's right.
I resent them because they're so-called making me do things I don't want to do.
They make me do it,
But they're really not making me.
That's right.
I'm just too much of a coward to say no.
Well, it puts so much stress in our lives.
Yeah.
Because we either have the fears that you were talking about or false guilt, all the reasons that we think we can't say no. And then the things that we allow people to do that hurt us, that if we can set a boundary, we'll stop that. And there's just so much stress involved in people's lives that some healthy, godly boundaries can help with.
Yeah.
And the Bible is just replete with so many commandments for us to have these boundaries. And yet, sometimes Christians have learned half the Bible. They learn the loving side. You're supposed to be patient and forbearing and forgiving and all this. But they don't learn and you're to speak the truth, and you're to confront somebody, and you're not to enable that. And those go together.
Yeah.
And sometimes we just get
Well, I'd like to
over-Christian.
ask you a question to have you answer, because I know that many people watching may be realizing for the first time through this, somebody is controlling me. If you've been in a controlling relationship for a period of time and you decide, I'm going to start setting boundaries, there is no possibility the other person's not going to get angry.
That's right.
So how does somebody get out of that bad cycle into a healthy one?
Well, the first thing, make sure you're safe. Some people have been controlled by people who really are master manipulators, and they're actually what the Bible refers to as evil. They have destruction in their hearts. I mean, they don't mind hurting you. In fact, they might even like it. And it also, Proverbs tells us there's another category people call the fools, mockers, and they don't like to be confronted.
Yeah.
And so it says, don't confront a mocker lest you'll incur insults upon yourself. And so the first thing is make sure you're safe. Some people, we have domestic violence situations. Last thing you want to do is go set a boundary in a dangerous situation. What the boundary you need to set is call a shelter or call your pastor or go get somewhere safe. Yeah. Now that's the extreme situations. It goes from there to, first of all, it's really important for you to get in touch before God. The Bible says we have to log out of our own eye first. And I would like for them, just sit down with somebody you trust and just take an audit of what is this costing you. Because we need to have good motivation to go through some of these conflicts it might, entail. And you start looking at it and you start realizing the pain you're suffering and all of that. But there's 2 other big things. One is the realization that it's not helping.
Yeah.
The way you've been people-pleasing is not turning this person into, Prince Charming or something.
Right.
And so to continue to do the same thing expecting different results is crazy. So let's wave the white flag on. I've been trying to love them out of this or give to them, and, their entitlement and all that. That's not working. And then also, what you're missing. And then the big one is there are so many situations where when you finally do this, there are people, it turns them around. They've never had anybody say no to them. And they begin to experience the consequences of what they're doing. And consequences for some people are the only thing that makes them turn around. And so all of that, I would say, if you're in a tough situation, don't do it alone. Go talk to somebody first. If it's serious, go talk to a good counselor, go to a boundaries group, go to a codependency group, get support, because boundaries are never set from a vacuum. We have to be standing on firm ground and have the support that we need to be able to do this. And you're probably going to need some coaching. So don't do it alone.
Yeah, that's a great point, because if we are at a point of woundedness, we might set some boundaries that are not healthy. We need to make
Right.
sure that we are doing it with with help to do it in a healthy way,
Right.
Yeah.
and a safe way. I think that's so important.
And remember, boundaries are not, I don't set boundaries on you.
Yeah.
I set boundaries on myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I can say, if you're on heroin or something,
Yes.
and
We've been talking to her about that.
Well,
It's good you're here.
Yeah, in fact, this is an intervention. We didn't tell you.
Wow.
but we've gathered here
Thank you
today.
for coming.
No, thank you.
Or you're with an alcoholic or whatever it is, or a rageaholic or whatever. So you know what? I've talked to you about this. Talked to you about your drinking, and it hadn't helped. So I'm not gonna really do that anymore. And I can't stop you. Only you can do that.
Yeah.
But what I can do is I can stop myself from being exposed to it. And so the family's decided, if you want to continue to drink, you can. We want you to stop. We want you to get some help and get treatment. But if you choose not to, then we're going to choose to not be around you until you do. So it's really your choice.
Sure.
But see, I can set boundaries on my exposure to bad things. I can't control another person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you can call the cops and the law steps in. But boundaries are about what I allow myself to be engaged with and what I don't.
That feels like a hard thing to do, especially as people in the church. I'll speak for myself. It feels like I am not acting, like you said earlier, out of God's love when I'm telling somebody I cannot help you anymore with your situation. It feels like that goes against what I'm taught to love people and be there for them and be generous with my time.
Yeah.
So what does that look like? How do you know when you've gone too far with overextending yourself or not setting a healthy boundary?
Well, the very first test is, what is my giving producing? What's my giving in the service of?
Do you have joy in what you're doing? Or is it making you miserable?
Sure. And do I feel obligated?
Right.
That's part of it. And is it helping them? If you're bailing somebody, we need to give to people in need and all that. But if somebody's irresponsible and they're not willing to get a job or they're not willing to deal with their issues, I will give to you, but what's it in the service of? It's only in the service of you continuing to stay stuck or addicted or irresponsible or not doing what you need to do, then my investment is getting a return. Investments get returns.
Yeah.
What I'm getting for the return is more addiction.
Right.
And so
That's good.
that's kind of the first realization. We have to ask, what's it in the service of? Secondly, though, so sometimes they're asking you for good things.
Yeah.
Right? The Bible is very clear. And I don't know if y'all notice this. We're not God.
Oh.
It's a bummer.
It's so true, and I'm not very good at realizing that sometimes. I think
But
I need
know
to
them.
control things,
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
good,
Yeah.
Dr. Cloud.
Nor are we the entire body of Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it says very specifically in a number of ways, in a number of places, you're his workmanship created in Christ Jesus to do some good things, to give to some things, give your time, give your energy and all of that, for good works that have been laid down before you so that you might walk in them. But every need out there is not your good work.
Right.
That belongs to God and somebody else.
Yeah.
Romans 12 says, do not think more highly of yourself than you are.
Right. Yeah.
There are certain things we're called to. You have certain gifts. You don't have other gifts.
Yeah.
And so we got to be clear before God. Back to 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians 9. Was it 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians?
One of the
Something 9
Corinthians.
says.
8 Corinthians
Yep.
9.
One of those
It'll
books.
be good for them to look it up.
What you've purposed in your heart.
Yeah.
Now, here's a good thing for people to do. Get a piece of paper. You're talking about love here, right? It's not loving if I don't give to you. Draw a line that's a continuous line in every relationship.
Okay.
That line, it's unbroken, and it goes infinitely in both directions. Call that line love. My love for you never wavers, ever. There's another line underneath it that's a dotted line or dashes with spaces. Call that what I will do for you. Sometimes, yeah, I'll do that, but no, I won't do that. I still love you. My love has never disappeared, but what I'll agree to do and not do, that's always a dotted line.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's helpful. Sometimes I need to do something else. Sometimes I don't want to.
Yeah.
And so we have to make sure we'll never equate, will I do this or that, with do I love you or not? Otherwise, God wouldn't be loving. He says no to us all the time.
That's such a great visual.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, do it with each relationship.
Yeah.
Well, you know, with your kids, yeah, I'll bring the food in, but you're going to make your sandwich.
You can come
Yes.
over, but you're cleaning up the mess.
I like it. That's good.
That's right.
Yeah.
Dr. Cloud was counseling me earlier about my dog. I also have boundary issues with Axel.
This sounds really deep.
It was actually really helpful because he told me I'm the problem, which is not a surprise. But even things like that in my life, I didn't realize how important boundaries are, and that it is me in that situation that needs to shift. It's not. I can't put that upon the dog. That's silly. That's little, but it was really important for me.
I see. I'm really into dog training, and I go on walks. I see people. You know, their dogs are taking them for a walk.
Yep.
Right? The dog is in control of them.
Yep.
And why? Because they're trying to control the dog.
Yeah.
You want your dog to have self-control. And they learn that through boundaries, that if I do this, my life is good. If I do that, I go to dog purgatory, right? And I don't want to live there. They are in control.
Yeah.
I have a dog problem. I've tried about 8 times, and I cannot make them mine because I'm like, oh, you're so cute.
You need a boundary, Dr.
Yes,
Cloud
you can
said.
get in my bed.
Oh, yeah.
You know, something I think it's important for us to say here. I think depending on the situation, but if you've been letting somebody control you for a long time and you decide you have to break that pattern, there is a possibility that they may no longer want to be in your life.
Absolutely.
So, and I think that's important for people.
reality.
You have to be at that reality. I know,
Yeah.
just a quick example, I had a group of friends at a church that I went to, and we were just like, you know, but this one girl, if you didn't do everything she wanted to do, she got upset. So I fell into that pattern of just keeping her happy because I wanted to be part of this group.
Easy to do.
Well, when God called me to preach, those were the first people that no longer wanted anything to do with me
Yeah.
because they told me that I shouldn't be doing that. And because I didn't listen to them and do what they wanted me to do, I preferred to do what God wanted me to do. Then, I mean, we lost friends. We got asked to leave our church. You know, it was a real eye opener that, you know, you let people control you. And when you get tired of it, you have to realize that confronting them may turn them around, and hopefully it will.
Yeah.
That's right.
But sometimes you have to be willing to say, I can live without that.
That, Joyce, you just hit something that's so important because, you know, humans, we're wired for relationship, and we need people, and we need these relationships. God
And we want
wired us.
people to like us.
And we want, and He meant for us to live in close community. And so the fear of rejection and abandonment is what drives so many people. And that's why I said, don't do this in a vacuum, okay? What you got to do first is you had your own tribe that was with you in where you were going, right? First, you knew some people were on your team. Then you can go from there to saying what you got to say and like the rich young ruler, Jesus set the boundary. He walked away. Mm-hmm. The guy left him.
Yeah.
Right.
He chose not to.
That's right. But he had somebody to go home to. He had his father. Mm-hmm. And he had, as he said, when they said, your mother, brother, sisters, he goes, who are those? But who's my family? Those who do the will of God. So you got to be grounded with supportive people before you ever think about boundaries.
You also mentioned what Scripture says, that the truth will set you free, that freedom is such a big part of this. Mm-hmm. I've had a relationship that I really cared about, that was important to me. And at some point, I just had to draw a boundary and was hoping that things would work out, and it did not go well. Yeah. And lost that relationship. And I'll tell you, like you said, it hurt. Mm-hmm. I mean, I mourned that relationship being gone. But in time, and it did take time, just felt a weight lifted.
Right.
While I missed that relationship, there was a weight lifted of some of the pressure of the unhealthy aspects that were a part of that relationship. And in time, you begin to realize that some of the pain is the only way to heal from the things that just are not right.
That's right. And Jesus said, clearly said, I'm going to divide people.
Yeah.
He said, there will be households that split up because of me. Right. And righteousness does that. When somebody says, we're going to live in a sober house, you're welcome to live here, but anybody that's not won't be living here. Those are, Paul says, if somebody's not willing to work, don't let them eat. These can bug people.
Yeah, to say the least.
That's one way to put it, yeah.
I always say if people want to hear yes, they're never happy if they hear no.
That's right. John Townsend and I wrote a book called Safe People, and there's a whole list of things about, the kind of safe people we need in our lives. And one of the questions you always have to ask and talk about in relationships, do you love my no as much as you love my yes?
Yeah.
Because ultimately, that's the value of them seeing you as a separate person who's free. You're not a slave.
Right.
Love can only exist in freedom. And if I'm manipulating somebody into loving me, I might get the cookie I'm trying to get, but I'm not getting love.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I'm not even going to be fulfilled by that.
Well, and Jesus drew boundaries in his own life, and that's one of the things that Joyce has talked about quite a bit. And that stress that we all deal with when we don't draw those boundaries, Jesus is a great example of how he handled that differently. So let's listen to what Joyce had to say about how this works, taking some of that stress out of your life the same way that Jesus did, and we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about that.
So stress is all around us. It's not likely to decrease. So what are our options? Well, we only have two as far as I can figure. Continue to be stressed out until we fall apart. That's an option, and sadly, I know that some of you will take that option. Or you can learn to not be affected by it by not letting it get into you. What's around us doesn't have to get in us. Amen? Peace has been defined as a quiet heart. And boy, do I love that. A quiet heart. Jesus was surrounded by stressful situations. Rejected by family and friends. Some of you are going through that right now. You're letting it stress you out. Accused of being evil, accused of doing something or having some kind of a wicked motive that's just not true of you at all. False accusations can stress us out, boy. We want to convince everybody that we're good. Has anybody ever noticed that Jesus never tried to do that? His disciples needed a lot of correction. He was mentoring them for the job of carrying the gospel to the world and only had a very short time to do it. Sometimes all the people around us that don't do what they ought to be doing can really stress us out. I have to always tell you what to do every time, constantly. And then when I tell you, you can't do it. Huge crowds followed him everywhere, and they all wanted miracles, healings, and help of some kind. You know, I've even said, everybody that comes near me wants something. Some of you moms, you feel that way. The husband wants something. All the kids want something. Then your parents call you up and they want something. Then your mother-in-law wants something. And it's just everybody wants a piece of me and I don't have any pieces left. How many ever feel like that? So. But see, Jesus, although he was there for people, he had boundaries. If you don't want the neighbor's dog pooing in your yard, then you better put up a fence. Amen. And that means that we need to put some fences up around our lives and say you can go this far, but you can't go any farther.
So good. And Erin didn't know that you were going to talk about Axel, her dog.
It's like you knew when you preached that message.
That's right.
Erin's gonna have a problem. I love
the pooping example.
It's a good one. I like
You
it.
can use that,
Well, people are,
but only if you give me credit.
I'll give you credit. Joyce is the one that said this. Don't let the dogs poop in your yard, but don't let the people poop in your heart.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes, that's good. In your boundaries book, I like the example you gave about the woman, and you kind of walk through her day of how stressed she is. And before I read it, I thought, I think my boundaries are fine in my life. Like, I don't have super controlling people that are concerning to me. I think I'm great. And then I read that, and I thought, oh my, I do feel some of those things that woman was feeling about where she was feeling stress points. And I think accepting the fact that there are some boundary issues made a really big impact on me to be able to see some holes and some gaps.
Yeah.
So
What were some of the gaps that you saw?
it was, I mean, even things that seem so silly, like rushing around in the morning to everybody's late because you're not creating space and time for things. So the boundary of preparing the night before.
How about you're not pulling away from the house at a certain time and leaving them in the kitchen?
Yes, almost done that before. The atmosphere changed in their home when the mom set boundaries for who was responsible for what, that it wasn't all on the mom to take care of.
It should not
And
be.
I think that as moms, and I can speak from a lot of my friends, that when we have these conversations, we feel the need to carry the weight of everything
That's
in
right.
the home. And it makes me emotional. It's exhausting. And so you got a bunch of burnout moms who are just trying to do everything.
Yeah, when our kids were little, I got a whiteboard, put it up and said, okay, here's the deal. Nobody lives here for free. Mm-hmm. Okay, everybody's got to pay to live here. Everybody's got to do a job. So I'm going to put all the jobs up on the board, and everybody gets to pick the one they want. And the first one was pay the mortgage. Who wants that? I didn't see any hands go up. And I said, okay, I'll take
volunteered.
that. Who's going to go to the store and make sure y'all got everything you need? Well, mom, whatever. So finally, they're like saying, I can feed the dog. I can, but everybody's got a responsibility, and they need to learn that early because that's going to equip them for life.
Yeah.
But if you're doing everything for them,
Yep.
then you're going to be doing it at 45 when they're watching video
that's
games
so
on
I don't
the
want that.
couch.
Absolutely.
Right? If you got problems, you're alive. That's good news.
Yeah.
But problems are meant to be solved. We address them. If there's a behavior problem with a kid or, each other or something, we solve it, right? And then we move on. That's okay. That's normal. But if we don't, then it's going to happen again. And you no longer have a problem at that point. You have a pattern. And once a pattern begins to develop, that's much more difficult than just addressing problems. That's why you go to Matthew 18, classic boundaries passage. Jesus said, if your brother, sins against you, bugs you, bothers you, whatever it is, go to them in private and talk about it. Early, quick, and then we won't have a problem. It said if they're wise, what do they say? Oh, gosh, I'm sorry, I don't want to, and it's done. It's over with. If they don't listen, he doesn't say, then nag them again. He says, no, if this is turning into a pattern, get a couple of other people to help you and sit down and say, we want to talk to you about something. And if that doesn't, and ultimately the boundaries there ultimately end in separating from that person. Because what he's trying to do is get us to contain something. And you know what word he uses? Bind. You read the passage, Matthew 18, 15 through 20, 21 or so. He gives us these steps, increasing boundaries, just like your immune system starts with saliva, then up the ante to stomach acid, and then the T cells, and ultimately you got to cut it out. And what he does is he has this progressive boundary, and then he says something. We hear people, I bind this in the name of, the word in the context, it's about relationships and that behavior that we're setting boundaries on. And then he says, for whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in the heavens. So when we're containing and binding bad behavior, it won't spread. And then he says, but if you loose it, it will be loosed. And so you've got the incarnational reality of here on earth. But what that does is that sets into force spiritual dynamics in that we can't see in relationships, in families, in communities, and beyond. And so he's the one that says, contain bad stuff. Don't let it become a pattern.
Wow. What are some of the things that people are dealing with now that, because this book has these spiritual truths in it that last for a long time, but culture changes. So for instance, let's talk about digital boundaries. Are there new things that we're seeing all the time that people have to learn how to set boundaries?
Well, one of the big problems, I think, with the digital world, the digital world's great. I mean, we're using it today, right? It's a tool, but all tools can be used for good or bad. But God built some boundaries let's just start with the basic one of how we order our lives. God built some boundaries in from creation. The primary ones, other than gravity, is time and space, okay? There used to be a time that you went to work, and work had a space. There was a boundary, time and space. So you go to work, I do my work, I leave work, and I go into life, and I do life.
Wow, is that changing?
Yeah.
Well,
Glued together.
Yeah.
then you got this little device now that pierces and does away with the boundaries of time and space. Now your boss can find you at 9 o'clock at night. They can find you on the golf course, which should
tell
never
me
be
about
allowed.
it. My boss.
Right, how about
Oh,
that?
yes. I just chase you all the time.
Yeah. Also, you used to have to intentionally bring home work with you if you had a special project. Now, we're just like, oh gosh, at 9 o'clock at night. So the first thing is time and space. That's the digital problem.
Yeah.
And it's very important for people. I set a rule a long time ago, no work emails at home.
Yeah.
I don't,
That's a hard one.
Do you think he knew what
Well-
we were doing last night? That we were emailing each other?
I understand.
Don't tell these things.
I understand there's sometimes, the
Sure.
man wasn't made for the Sabbath was made for man. So
Yeah.
the rules have got to work for you,
Sure.
but you got to have some.
Right.
So is there a Sabbath
Right.
from
right.
work
what
daily
works,
at
right.
some point?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and so that's one problem. The other problem is people can get to you at any time they want. We used to have to actually answer the phone
Yeah.
Yeah.
and not know who was there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now somebody texts you anytime, and people feel the obligation to answer an email or text when it comes.
Yeah.
Why? Why can somebody just
don't
walk
know.
in your
Tell
door and have you at that moment?
I don't want them to feel like I ignored them. I don't know.
Poor babies.
I know. When I say it out loud, it sounds ridiculous.
Well, my children, especially 3 out of the 4, if they call me and I don't answer, in 30 minutes they'll call me back. And if I don't answer, they're going to show up at the door to make sure I'm okay.
Oh.
So I always answer my kids.
Well, but that even might be an agreement. Like somebody's got a medical condition and I don't respond to you.
I didn't agree to it,
Exactly. No, exactly.
said
I get that.
but they do it out of love. They just
get
want to
Right.
make sure
They're
that,
caring for
that
you.
I'm okay.
I get that. I was so proud of my daughter Olivia and her friends when they were in high school. They call it their squad, and that's their team. That's their support. And they can deal with all the bullies and all the junk going on because they got their squad. And they would have a once a week dinner with the squad. You know what they did? These were high schoolers. When the squad got together, they had a basket. Each one of them turned their phones off and put it in the basket
Wow.
That is impressive.
And they were in
because
high
they're going to
school.
be with each other.
Wow.
Well,
Yeah.
Ginger left home the other day without her phone, and I was so proud of her. She did not go back to get it.
It's
Go,
true.
girl.
It was a big deal.
And I called her
Joyce knows
twice
how
that
much
day,
it
and she
was a
didn't
big
answer me.
deal.
Did you almost go over there and check on her?
No.
If you're not an ER doc or an ambulance driver, I mean, do you really need that phone for the next 3 hours?
Did you feel
know-
naked though? Like something was missing?
It felt so strange. And I
Yeah.
can't tell you how many times I reached for it.
Yeah.
Or, all those things that we do all the time. But, we were with family and we don't get to see our family that often. And I said, oh, no, I forgot my phone. And Tim said, well, we better go back. And it was really just kind of a peace, a Holy Spirit thing. It was like, no, I'm going to be okay. God will help me through this. I twitched all day.
Yes.
But it
I
was a
think the
good
reason
thing.
why I answer them all is because I don't want them piling up on me. I don't want to have to do them all later.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Yeah,
purposeful.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's
just
not
like-
out of fear of somebody,
yeah.
That's purposeful.
Mine's fear. Yours feels like a good reason.
Well, let's talk about some of those things that do impact our boundaries. Fear is one of them.
Fear's
that
great one.
will be hurt or that will hurt someone else. How do you handle that fear?
I think people should really sit down and take an audit of your fears. Now you can work backwards, reverse engineer this. You look at the situations where you're not having good boundaries and go sit down and say, why did I do that? Why did I not speak up? Why didn't I say no? And then sit down and ask God, Psalm 139 says, God, try my anxious thoughts and see if there's any hurtful way in me and lead me in the way of the everlasting. So I got to sit down and say, why did I do that? And you're going to get down to fear is one of them. Let me give you another one. Programming. A lot of people grew up with maybe a really self-centered, entitled parent.
Well, I grew up with a father that was very controlling and manipulative, and if you did not do exactly what he wanted you to, he got mad.
That's
So-
right.
That was one of the things I was going to bring out, is that's been the hardest thing for me. I mean, I can say no to anybody, but if it's close, somebody I'm close to, or somebody I want their approval, I don't want their disapproval. If I'm going to say no to them, I have to really buck up and pray through and do it on purpose, because it's not easy for me still.
Well, you learned how to keep the peace, right?
Yeah, I learned to be the peacemaker in the family, and my dad was abusing me, so we had all these secrets, and I took that as my responsibility to make sure my mother never found out, and then she knew it, wouldn't do anything about it. But I've noticed that it's like some people use the word imprinting, like like it's like that got so imprinted in my soul
That's right.
that the only way to keep Daddy happy was to always do exactly what he wanted. And so I'm good with every other area at saying no, but if it's somebody that's real close to me and saying no to them is going to make them mad, if I do it, I have to do it on purpose.
Yeah.
That's and what you just said is so important. It's talking about the patterning that you learn. When our neurological systems and our psychological emotional systems, they are wired in our early relationships.
They are,
That's the way God designed it for good. Deuteronomy 6. We're supposed to be wiring our kids into God's ways. But we also get wired into very dysfunctional ways. And when you take what you said, Joyce, when you take our wiring for attachment, emotional investment in a relationship, our need for this relationship, when you wire that with the programming and the coding that the only way to have that attachment is to give in and do what they want, now you've got wiring that will repeat itself. And then somebody goes out and they start dating, and a good person comes along. They're not wired to be attracted to that person. They're wired to what's familiar a lot of times. So you get in it.
Yeah.
Now, remember, look at this. Look at her life now. Look at the fruit that God has done through you and healed you. Wiring can change.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the message of the gospel. But it doesn't change by just saying, oh, I'm not going to do that anymore. It changes in the same way that it first got laid down, and that's where we get back into. This is why God said in Ephesians 4 that the body heals itself as each part does its work. We've got to be connected to God, which is the verse before, And then it says, we've got to be in a new community
Right.
that rewires, that loves your no, that loves it when you won't allow yourself to be hurt, and supports that. And that will create new wiring in people. And it literally happens. And now, as you go on, the old stuff, it's like old telephone wires in your basement. They're not hooked up to anything anymore, and you get stronger and stronger. And that's the
Right.
fruit of self-control.
Right.
It's amazing.
A lot of those fears probably, like the people who love you, are probably not going to be upset with you now when you say no. They are based on either the past or something that may not even be realistic anymore, but they're still so ingrained in us that they're really hard to change.
Right.
It's that fear of rejection or all the different things that we think, if I set up a boundary here, am I going to be left out? You know, am I going to end up being alone?
And you might be left out of some particular people, but you're not going to be alone in the universe. See, that's the child brain. When a child is getting wired, the whole world will abandon me if I do A, B, or C. They're right, because their whole world is one or two people.
Right.
That subjective experience stays in the adult, and you'll feel there's only however many billions of people in the world now that you have choices to, you know, who you're going to be connected to. But it feels like I'm going to be alone in the universe if this one person rejects me. And that's Paul said, when I was a child, I thought and did all this. Now I've become, we got to change this stuff. That's why, Joyce, I'm going to just tell you this. I've told you this 1,000 times, but what I love and value about many things, but one of most about what you do is you empower people to live free lives unto God. And you help so many people.
Thank you.
By ordering their spiritual development, their relationships, how they think, how they pray, all of that. You're just empowering so many people that have been victimized. And God bless you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. Listen, I want to mention before the program's over that Dr. Cloud has written a new book called Why I Believe. And I'm reading it, my husband's reading it, my son's reading it. The book is really good. He's sharing some things from a psychologist's point of view about miracles and just scientific things.
It's a very different book for me because I usually write about my field. And it starts out in the preface, says, I have an issue, and this book is my attempt to solve it. I love God, and I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that He's real. He's proven that to me for decades. That's not my problem. My problem is I love my friends, and many of them don't know Him, and we've never talked about it with some of them. Because that's a hard conversation with some people to have. It's divisive for some people. They feel
especially
judged.
if they don't want to hear it.
That's right. But then it says, that's not being a good friend either. So you know what? I'm going to write down why I believe. And I did something I've never done. I just told my whole story about when I hit bottom and God healed me. And
he was in a psych ward. Who would have
rescued
ever
me.
thought that?
Yeah. So depressed in college. Had to take a semester off. But God entered the picture, and there's a whole section in there on the miracles that He did. But then that brought up a lot of intellectual questions for me. And everybody was telling me, well, science has disproven the Bible, and it's full of myths and all this. So I had to spend a couple of years back then deep diving into the sciences. And the book is telling my friends, I had the same questions you do, and these are the answers I found that made my doubts go away. And so I hope it's a book that
That's
people
great,
will
yeah.
give to their friends.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very helpful.
It's called Why I Believe.
Yep.
Well, Dr. Cloud, thank you so much. We really appreciate
Well,
any help we can get with
Absolutely.
boundaries and all of the daily stressors that come into our lives, and really taking it from God's word and applying what Jesus did to our lives, and just being able to talk about it is hugely
Yeah.
beneficial. Thank
It'll
you.
help a lot of people.
thank y'all for having me. It's always fun to be back with
Thank
y'all.
you, Dr. Cloud.
We
Well, who wouldn't want to
appreciate
be with three good-looking women?
That's what I said.
That's the right answer.
Said sign me up.